Okay, restrictive covenants. In an apartment complex, in a little apartment community, there's rules. They're saying no loud music after 3 a.m., no pets, no running naked down the halls. Lots of things you can't do in an apartment complex. And if you do these things, you'll be kicked out of the apartment complex. And if you resist being kicked out, you'll be forced out. And you'll be forced out because that's the contract you signed to, and it's their private property. Now, whether or not you view how this private property was acquired, if you view that as legitimate or not, that's a discussion at its own length. But what is the legitimate acquiring of property? But assuming this is legitimately acquired by the landlord, just assuming that, then yeah, he'd kick me out, and that'd be that. And he could use force to kick me out if he really wanted to. So, and you can also have housing communities. You say no trash on the lawn. House needs to be painted a certain color. You have to have green grass. You can't let the grass turn yellow. Or if you don't want to have, or if you don't want to mess around with grass, you can just put rocks. All sorts of things that you have to do to, conform to neighborhood guidelines. And if you don't conform to neighborhood guidelines, you'll be fined. And if you continue to not conform, then you'll be evicted. And you signed a contract saying that I will conform to X, Y, and Z guidelines, and assuming that the house that the housing community acquired was legitimately acquired, then yeah, that's that's just the violent enforcement of private property. So that's what I'm talking about when I said restrictive covenants. And the reason I don't want to be using that word anymore is because I did a Google search for restrictive covenants, and the first thing that came up was racial restrictive covenants in the Deep South. And given that I used to call myself a white nationalist, that doesn't paint a very good picture. So, but I think it's a appropriate term. You're restricting the covenant. You're restricting who can live there. So whatever. But anyway, so yeah, and the reason I chose the word restrictive covenant was because I heard two users bring it up. Actually, one user bring it up, Anton Beatty, and I heard Hans Hermann Hoppe talk about it. And that's where I learned about the word. I learned about the word from Hans Hermann Hoppe. And I thought, well, that sounds like, like a gated community. That sounds like a good idea. And you could say, and you can have gated community, apartment complex. All these things are different types of restrictive covenants. And that's why I use the word. And what's more is I like the word because it's a big word. I could call it a township. I could call it a gated community. But restrictive covenant sounds more, it's more old and it's a bigger word. And I like using old and big words. So that's why I used that word instead of gated community. But for now on, I'm just going to be calling it gated community, because I say restricted covenant and baggage. What else? Wow, I have a long time. But yeah, this was really blown out of proportion, and the reason it was blown out of proportion, and people trying to say that I'm secretly trying to advance white nationalism. And the people who are saying that I'm secretly trying to advance white nationalism are the social anarchists. They call themselves social anarchists. But the thing is, anyone who's like an anti-statist is a social anti-statist. As opposed to what? An antisocial anti-statist? I'm against the state, but I oppose social cooperation. I mean, that's retarded. So someone who calls themselves a social anarchist, that's question begging, an implicit insinuation that people who disagree with him are antisocial. It's retarded. Anyway, and of course it's these people who think that I'm trying to advance racially restrictive covenants in a stateless society. And the reason they think this is because they don't understand economics. They don't understand how the racial restrictions on the train coach, blacks in the back, or the bus lines, blacks in the back, and because if you think about these bus lines, I mean, in these urban areas, the black people were their best customers, And so you could have a bus line. Like, the only way for these... If a bus line said, all right, we're no longer going to be making black people sit in the back, black people will be able to sit in the front, or, or we'll say whites in the back or something like that. I don't know, but they'll like not say that, and obviously black people would prefer that. I would if I was a black person, and they'd make more money and they'd take the market share and they'd dominate the market. Okay, and so the only way this blacks in the back thing could be done was through the state, was through state imposition, to say law that said you had to do that, and that's why, that's why the bus lines in Montgomery were able to do that. Okay? Free market can't get away with this stuff. You can't do this stuff on a free market. On a free market, what I can envision happening is you can have all white neighborhoods, but these all whites, and they're basically just like neighborhoods. People go to work normally, and then they go home back to like an all-white gated community. That's basically what I see happening. I don't see all-white mini economies coming to be, and even the all-white gated communities are going to be suffering economically because they have to, because it's not totally emergent, right? It's still a product of an archon of the mind that is an archon of the mind that I used to fall for, which was that the race is a extension of the biology when it's not. And I have a video on that. I called it my last video on race and racism, and I want that to be my last video, and so you can go watch that if you care. But that's really all it is. I think one reason that a lot of people can get away with calling me a totalitarian in my ideology is because I am a totalitarian in how I manage my YouTube channel, and that I block a lot of people. And that's true, I am a totalitarian in how I manage my YouTube channel. And so when someone says you're a totalitarian in how you manage your YouTube channel and you're a totalitarian in your ideology, that does seem kind of plausible. Right. Now, the reason I block a lot of people is because, like here's the thing. When you're supporting the state, you're supporting extortion. And so when someone comes on and just so casually comes in and says, I support extortion, or they'll say something like, well, extortion is bad, but it's the system we got to work in, and we got to really work with this voting thing, this mob rule thing. They call it democracy, and we really got to work within this mob rule thing in order to keep the extortion racket honest. We got to keep the extortion racket honest. It takes eternal vigilance to make sure the extortion racketeers don't abuse their power. All right, that's what it sounds like to me. It's insane. It's stupid. And it's very murderous. I mean, and I know, and the reason I don't block people like, first comment when they say that is because they've grown up in a statist system and they have all this indoctrinated into them, and they're trained not to see the guns, okay? But the reason I block so many people, after a while, they continue to post like this, and they show no willingness to, to see through it all. The reason I eventually block a lot of people is because it's extortion, and these people are advocating extortion. And I'm willing to, grace period. Like I used to believe in it, all right. And so I basically see it, 14 days. 14 days is pretty good. That's about how long it took me. It actually took me not really that long. I mean, that's how long it took me once I started looking into it. So about 2 weeks is, about what you need to do. And so what I'll do, as soon as someone told me to go to freedomainradio.com, it was about 4 days after that I became a full-blown anti-statist. And so when I tell someone go to Mises.org, freedomainradio.com, antistate.org, and go see these videos on my playlist, go see these users, I give them, a bevy. And if it's 10 days later and they're still posting it, and a lot of guys it's like a year later, like the Revolutionary Jam, like a year later, and I know he's a very nice person personally, okay, but he's like, yeah, I think you need a little bit of extortion, and the Chinese economy recovered very well because they had extortion, and it's retarded, right? And just replace state with extortion, and you'll know why I block so many people and why I get so tweaky and fly off the handle a lot. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say here, just a response to a buttload of criticism I've been getting, partly because of my actions and partly because of my actions in relation to the prevailing zeitgeist.